Okay, let's get started painting our pretty pink flamingo. I have it already drawn onto my 100% cotton paper. This is Arches 140 pound. And I've made a very, very pale puddle of rose madder with lots and lots of water in it so that it's just a fine, transparent pink. I want it to be pretty light because we're going to do lots of layers and it's going to get darker as we go. So I'm going ahead putting this on wet paint on dry paper, and I'm leaving behind where I want the highlights to show. So on the top of his head, in front of his bill, around the back of his neck, wherever I think the sun might be shining and making it a little bit lighter, I'm going to go ahead and just leave that white for now. And I'm just going through this and just making a nice wash with this, just super pale. And if I get some blooms in there, it's kind of a good thing in this painting. In case you don't know what blooms are, a lot of people like to avoid them, and we've talked about them lots in other videos, but they can work in certain applications, and you can do them on purpose if you want. So how you get a bloom is I'm putting down this wet paint onto my dry paper, or it could even be wet paper. That doesn't matter. But then when I let it soak into the paper a little bit and it begins to dry, and I come back and put that wet paint on top of it again, that wet paint will push the paint underneath it out to the edges, and it'll leave this little fluffy little bloom like somebody put cotton in your painting. And it can be to your benefit in some cases. And in this one, it'll look like feathers. So that's really good. Where you really don't want it is on something that you need to be perfectly smooth and even. And then you get a bloom and it kind of messes up the whole thing. And then you got to rethink your painting and try something else. But anyway, in this case, if I get some blooms, it's great. In fact, I might even try to put some in on purpose. So here I'm just taking it section by section and just trying to make it very light. And I'm going back over now and I'm hoping to get a few little blooms. So I'm putting it on, putting a little bit of yellow on it where the sun's going to be shining. You can do white, just leave it white, but I like to use a little bit of yellow because flamingos are different colors depending on what region they come from. Some of them are almost like a really dark orangey red, and then some of them are super, super pale. I guess it all depends on what kind of shrimp they eat and minerals they get out of the water, and that'll change their color, but also where they live. So this one I'm trying to go for a very pale pink flamingo. And as I add more and more layers on it, it will get darker than it is now. So I have to keep that in mind with this first initial layer. And then always remember that watercolor is going to dry much lighter. So I'm just going to try to barely put a little bit of yellow here. I could just leave this little white here. I'm putting the water so that it'll kind of blend on its own right there in the front there. And I'm coming back with kind of a downward stroke to kind of mimic feathers. So on the neck and the head, the feathers are very short and very smooth. So on his body, they can be very fluffy. You can go as wild as you want on the body. So I'm just trying to kind of mimic some feathers here, and I'm putting on my water and my pink and softening the edge. I don't really want a hard line there. I'm just adding a little bit of water on top of it, hoping that I'll get some little feather marks in there. And I can see them starting to emerge. You see that down by the inside of his neck? You can see those little blooms starting to happen. And they happen as the painting is drying. It's always moving until it's dry, that paint. So just keep watching it. And if some of them get out of hand, you can just take your brush, a damp brush that you've dried off with a towel, and kind of move the paint a little bit. We'll just kind of let it naturally do its thing here and get a few of these little blooms going. So now my next section is also smooth. And I'm going to come down in his chest there in the bottom of his neck under his bill where he's preening his little feathers. And I'm just going to kind of do the same thing, continuing it on from the head and the neck. And I'm leaving that little front top part of his bottom of his neck, front of his chest. I'm going to put a little bit of yellow in there to represent the sunshine. I'm just mixing up a little bit of the rose madder here, trying to get it a little more to keep continuing on. So now I'm looking at the feathers on his wing, and I want some of them to kind of stick up, but I'm just going to see what we can do here, just kind of going in the motion of how his feathers would lay. So see how those feathers right on his shoulder would kind of curl back and onto his wing. And maybe a few would stick up, so I'll add that later. And then I'm just going and making a feather stroke. I'm using my round brush. You could also do this with a flat brush. You'll get kind of more rounded ends, and on the rounded brush, you'll get pointy ends. So it's funny to think that with a flat square brush, you'll get rounded ends, but you will. It's fun to try, so go ahead and experiment a little bit with that. And it's also great when you're making petals on flowers. That flat brush will make beautiful petals. So we're going to continue on trying to think about how these feathers will go, and they're going to be, fluffy around his back there, and he's got his bill dipped in under his wing because he's kind of pruning his feathers, so he's cleaning himself. So we are just going to try to think about these feathers and how would they lay. This isn't super critical at this point because we're going to go over these feathers and define them a little more. But you're just getting that movement, that motion into your painting. So the feathers towards the back are going to be longer, bigger feathers. So I'm kind of going bigger strokes. And you can use a big brush if you want it for this step. I'm leaving a little bit of white in between, just so that they don't all run together and be one big mass. So try to leave a little bit of white, and that's just reflections off the light that's surrounding him. And I'm just going to continue on. And remember, I'm going to come back because I got to put a little darker and a little bit of that kind of orangey color in there. So I'm thinking about that while I'm leaving these white spots, because they can be bigger than what I want in the end, because I'm going to still add more paint. Hope that makes sense to you. So now I'm just coming back and defining a few of these feathers with another quick layer. Everything's still wet though, so it's still going to blend and merge, but I can kind of get that feathery feeling to it, even if it's for my own self right now. It's putting this movement, this motion in my brain. So as I continue with my painting, I automatically will go in that direction. Unless I think too hard, which I do sometimes, so try not to do that, I guess. All right, now I'm just coming back with a little bit of water and whatever paint's on my brush, trying to kind of make those blooms and, those feathers underneath. And that'll kind of give me a direction of how I want to define my feathers by what turns out with this little underpainting and the blooms. Coming back and just kind of fixing a few where I don't like how they're bunching up. So my brush is practically dry. There's no paint on it, and I'm just moving that paint just a little bit before it's totally dry. Now it's totally dry, and you can see how we got some of those blooms in there, and especially in the shoulder feathers. Those look really nice right there. And it makes it a little bit lighter, but it has those little fluffy edges that look like feathers. They do to me anyway. So now I'm going to come on back, and I have a smaller brush. This is just a number 8, I believe, round. And I gotta mix me up some paint. So I'm just over here wetting my paints and seeing what colors I want to use. I'm going to definitely come back in with some more rose madder. And I need some orange and maybe a little purple. Or maybe just yellow. So now I've switched my brush up because I think I'm going to work on these feathers instead of the neck. I was thinking I'd work on the neck first. So I'm going to go back to my big number 12 round. Could even go bigger. Seems to be a standard round brush for me, though. I like that one a lot. I'm thinking. Okay. Here we go. So I'm looking at my feathers. Where do I want to start? I think I'll start at the bottom because all the other feathers would be on top of the bottom feathers. So I'm thinking the bottom is a really good place to start. So then when I put more strokes on top, they will blend. So I'm just going to add a little rose madder, trying to think about feather shapes at this point and not making it solid. So I'm going to leave a little bit of lighter pink from underneath. I don't want to paint over the whole thing. And I'm just trying to think of how those feathers would look. And I'm thinking at the tips of the feathers, not what's connected to the bird, because that's all going to be covered up with my next layer. So just defining the feathers with a little bit of the rose madder. And this is very watered down as well. I have it mixed on my palette, which is on my right here, and this is just a little bit of a darker yellow orange color. I like Daniel Smith, and I like Magello, Mission Gold. Those are very nice, highly pigmented paints where you can get a lot of color, because I usually like to paint very bright. So now I'm thinking about the second layer now of these feathers. And this is his wing. And I want to leave those light spots in. Try not to cover up all your white, but you got to cover up some of them. But you still see that lighter bit coming through where I painted over the white. So it's just giving me another shade and a little bit of texture in these wings, which is good. So now I'm thinking about how these feathers would be kind of ruffled up on his back. It's the top of his wing, actually. And I kind of want him to be a little bit shaggy because, he's probably just came out of the pond and he's shaking off a little bit and he's just smoothing out all his feathers and making sure he looks good. And now we got a little bit darker, a little too dark. I'm going to kind of soften that just with a little bit of a damp brush. And I'm thinking, oh boy, okay, here we go. Sometimes you get a little hesitant to make that motion, but that's what you want to do. Just really quick, really loose. Don't think too hard. If you think too hard, it's going to be too contrived and it won't look fluffy. It'll just look plastered down feathers. So now these feathers are sticking up. These are his ruffled feathers. So I'm going to go ahead and stick some of those up and get them a little bit messy here in this area. And we're coming up to the top of his wing, which would probably have shorter little feathers in there. So these ones aren't as long. And as you can see, when we put the second layer on, it's starting to define each and every feather there. Even though we're still using just another layer of that thin, watered down rose madder paints. So it's kind of like the consistency of like a skim milk where you can see right through it. It's just tinted puddle of water. And that's what watercolor is anyway, just tinted puddles. Just depends on how much tint you put in them. So you can always layer, which makes everything darker, which is what is so beautiful about watercolor. The transparency and how you can see the layers underneath it. And everything that you do helps your finished painting. So even though these layers will all get covered with more paint, you're still going to be able to see them through the painting. And then we can choose which ones we want to highlight. So the sun's probably shining down from that top and the right hand side. So I'm just going to put a little bit of that yellow orange in there, just to represent the sunshine. So now I have to come get my smaller brush. And we're going to work on these neck feathers and the chest, because those are shorter feathers too. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start from the bottom because all the other feathers going up are going to overlap. So I'm going to get some of that yellow orange. So there's want a little bit of separation from the wing to the body. So if there's a highlight I can capture, I'm going to do that. And now I'm just making short little strokes. And I just very pale, just want them to kind of show that there's a texture there. There's feathers. I want to go with the shape of his chest at this point. Kind of getting that curve, seeing how they would lay. So they would curve around underneath his body. So sometimes you just gotta like throw a few up there and then work back down. Just to make sure you get that nice direction. So they're like little points of, where you're going to aim. So you can see I'm leaving some of the light background in there. And then I'm gonna kind of go over a little bit because I don't want a definite cutoff line here. I want it to be soft. So I went very pale in there, but now when I'm putting that same paint on top of the previous layer, you can see it turns out darker than the part where I had left white. Just throw in a little bit of that sunshine. And if you look over to his wing, you can see how that second layer had put a few more blooms into my feathers. So I liking that. So in here, there's going to be a little bit of a shadow. I'm going a little bit darker. So now I'm using like a whole, not even a whole milk. Let's go 2% milk consistency here. So it's not super saturated, but I want to show some depth there, whereas Bill is kind of tucked on under there. So there would be a little bit of shadow there, a little bit of light from his chest. So I put that yellow orange in there. It's all going to dry lighter. And always remember that because it looks pretty dark now. But as you're building, and I'm going to be building a few more layers onto this, so it'll all balance out in the end. So now where those shadows are, you're not going to really see the definition of the feathers as much. So they can be a little bit more solid in that area where you want the depth to be. I got to be careful because I'm getting a little too dark on my highlighted areas. So I don't want to keep adding paint. Just very lightly, just enough to blend it together. Because I don't really want a jagged edge there. I just want to have a soft transition from the highlighted area to around his neck. And that'll also make his neck have a rounded shape by putting that darker in the middle and leaving the edges just a little bit lighter. It'll make it more round looking and not so flat. We're very hesitant, especially when you first start painting, to keep adding paint, like you're getting too dark and blending it too much, but that's how you learn. So just try it, go for it. It's only paper, a little bit of paint. I mean, as you've been painting, it takes a lot of paint to use up a tube, a lot of painting to use up a tube of paint. So you're not really using much and you're learning. So you consider it an investment in your artist education. So I'm just going around and I'm adding more and more feathers, and I have to define like the top of his head a little bit, but very pale. So this is still very pale pink. And kind of letting the water, dipping my brush back into the water and the paint because I'm watering it down a little bit more that way by dipping my brush before I load it into the puddle of the paint. Around his eye, he's going to be a little darker in there. And there's a defining the front of his head there. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking my feathers look a little too busy there on his neck, but that's okay. I can come back and soften that out. I'm just going to continue with his head, and I'm making it smoother on his head because I'm sure those feathers are super, super tiny. I live in Florida, and flamingo is like the bird that represents Florida. And everybody thinks of tropics when you think of flamingos, but we really don't see them flying around. We did have a hurricane, and it brought them in with the winds. The flamingos did come to Florida, and we do have some now. They're over by the coast, and I'm inland, so I haven't gotten a chance to go see them, but I've seen lots of pictures, and I can't wait to go see them. I guess you got a kayak out to, like, over by Merritt Island, and also, which is on the ocean side, but then on the Gulf side, near Tampa, Sarasota, the celery fields, they have flamingos over there, so I want to see them. And down in the Everglades, there's been flamingos. So the hurricane's been, I think, 2 years ago now, and the flamingos still stayed around, so hopefully they're here to stay. And, hopefully that they'll make more little baby flamingos so they'll be more prevalent, so we can see them all the time. What we have inland here is spoonbills, the roseate spoonbills, which are also pink. And the first time I saw one of them, I thought, oh my gosh, there's a flamingo. But the bill is actually flat on the end, kind of like a spoon, like a big old serving spoon shape. It's pretty neat. And they're pretty cool birds too. But the flamingos, there's just something so elegant about them and how they stand, and they're pretty cool. So I recently learned that it is not a flock of flamingos, it's a flamboyance of flamingos. Funny how there's different words for a gathering like that in the animal world. Pretty cool though. So now I'm thinking, okay, those feathers were kind of choppy there, and I want to smooth them out just a little bit. And maybe really all I need is like a few little blooms to happen. So I'm coming back with that pale, pale, pale pink. And I decided right in there might more be a shadow rather than a highlighted area. So I'm going to make that a little darker. And then I'm going to just kind of bring that paint into my jagged areas a little bit. And it'll soften it. I really like how the chest turned out down there. So that's softer. And so far, we've done this all wet on wet. Wet paint on wet paper from the paint that we've already applied, and then the wet paint. So I'm coming back in here, adding a little bit more of a shadow, and I'm kind of outlining a feather. Like, where would a feather be sticking up maybe? And giving this just a little bit more depth right there by his wing, and leaving those feathers highlighted. And I actually got some cool brush strokes at the top of it right there, and I'm going to try to preserve those right in there. That just happened from my brush, just going loose, quick movements there. Kind of let them stand out. I like those. And blending it into that front area. I think I'm going to have to add a little bit more of that sunny color, the yellow-orange in there. First, I'm going to come up here, kind of define his head a little bit and the crook of his neck. Make it a little darker right in there. Make his head look more round. I'm calling him a he. Could be a girl. Who knows? I don't know what the difference is. Some might be paler. Like a lot of times in the bird world, the female isn't as brilliant as the male. I don't know if that's true with flamingos. You always see them as pink. So there we're above his bill too, kind of more puffy. So I put just a little bit of depth in there. And then now kind of around his eye is darker. That usually leads right to the back of his head. Almost in all birds I've painted. The eye area is darker, almost with a point towards the back of the head. Coming from the bill, across the eye. Back of his head, right about there. And I'm just going to try to soften it in there. I can see a big bloom happening right in front of his eye. I'm going to let that happen and see if I like it. Before it dries, if I don't like it, I can smooth it out with my brush. But for right now, I'm just going to let it do its thing. Keep an eye on it, keep watching it. And I'm just adding that darker pink around his eye. And I'm realizing that I'm kind of going in the wrong direction with his feathers. I kind of got to curve back around his head. So I got to come make a few more brush strokes there. But while this is still wet and blendable, I'm just going to smoothly put some paint and water right in, defining my edges too. I noticed, as I teach my classes, making nice crisp edges is a challenge. How you do that though, as you can see, I'm using the tip of my brush, but I'm also using the side of my brush. So anywhere that there's a smooth surface on my brush, I can use that to kind of outline my edges. So now I'm just trying to get a few more blooms. I am adding just water. Just water. Getting them all mixed into those feathers. I'm hoping to get blooms rather than those choppy strokes. So I'm softening them at this point. Just coming in with some water. And I'm adding I'm here right in the front, I'm adding a very, very, very pale wash of that yellow-orange. I'm just trying to blend at this point. I see the blooms happening. Trying to get my feather strokes in the right directions. And come back with a little bit yellow-orange in the front. Blending it in a little bit and trying to turn those feathers. So right there behind his eye, they would go straight back to the back of his head, but they're going to turn as his neck curves. So they're going to go with the shape of the curve of his neck. And now everything's still wet, so I can come back in now with some more dark pink, because you can see it pretty much blended in. So I'm coming a little stronger this time. Rose Madder, and it's about 2% milk consistency. And because I'm adding this on damp paper, it's going to make more blooms. It took me a long time to understand how to get a bloom and how to prevent a bloom, because they would just show up and I didn't know why. But through experience, I've kind of figured that out. So now I'm liking the way that looks, and I'm liking the color. I'm adding a little bit of water and a little bit of the purple. So this is bright clear violet. And I added some there under his chin, and look at, I'm getting a bloom. So what it's doing is it's pushing away the paint where I added it and pushing that purple up higher. I really didn't want that. So I had it put it on while it was still way too wet. I can come back though and reapply. You can see it just a little bit, but I think it's going to be okay. Now I just wiped off my brush, rinsed it off, no paint on it. And I'm just coming back and I am lifting out a few places that got too dark. So I'm just wiping it on my brush, rinsing off my brush, getting all the water out, and I want those feathers to turn, so I'm kind of wiping out some highlights to make them look like they're going in the right direction. So how you do that is you rinse all the paint out of your brush, you dry it off on a paper towel, and then use it like a mop. Mop out some paint. And you can see that you took out some paint when you wipe it on the paper towel. You'll see the paint. So now I want to look at my painting and define some feathers. So like these are going to be over the top of these feathers that are on the bottom. So I'm just kind of doing a negative painting effect. I'm just outlining the tips of the feathers, with, letting that paint be soft on one side by blending it out with water. And the other side, I'm going to leave a hard line. So it actually carved out a shape, a feather shape. Maybe some of the structure of the feather. I'm just using the tip of my brush to kind of make a few little soft feathery motions in there. So that's like the rib in the feather, and soften it out. I don't want it to be too hard. And then on the edge, I'm kind of just blending in some shaggy marks. Now at this point, you could not define all your feathers and just come back and put a few more brush strokes on those feathers and it'll look beautiful. And you don't have to do all this negative painting, but I wanted to show you how to, just in case you want to go there. But you can leave it just like that, finish his bill and his eye, and you'll have a gorgeous painting. And it's loose, and that this is making it more defined, so it's not as loose. But I like to show you a couple options, so if you're a more experienced painter and you want to keep going, I can show you what I did. Of course, I don't know everything there is about painting, and I really hope I never do, because that's the fun of it for me, is experimenting and discovering all of these little tricks and things that you can do to change your painting, and gives you confidence to know that if you don't like something, you can keep going and you still can change it. So, a lot of times I look at my paintings for a long time before I make brush strokes on the next layer or something, because I'm not sure where I want to go. But now that I've been painting probably about 10 years, I get more experience, so I already know if I do this, this will happen or whatever. So, I'm winging it at this point, get it? I know, bad joke. Okay. So I put a little bit of that yellow orange in there because there's a lot of little orange highlights in the feathers. I mean, not just from the sun, but from the color of the flamingo. They kind of have these, depending on where they're from, have a little bit more orange in them. Some of them are more pink and whitish color, some of them yellow and pink, some of them red and orange. Very dramatic. Really cool bird. That's probably why everybody loves them. Well, they're pink. You can't not love a pink bird, but can you? I don't think so. But then again, I love pink, so. Alright, so now this feather is darker than the ones underneath. I have to decide if I want that. So I can blot it one time. Put a little bit more water, soften it out a little bit more, and I can blot it again. So every time I blot it, it'll take off just a little bit of paint, so I'm controlling it. See, blot. The best thing to blot with is something with no pattern. So a lot of times you'll see me using the Scott 1000 toilet tissue that doesn't have that quilted swirl in it, or Viva paper towels are great because you can use them and use them. Then you can rinse them out even. They're really good. And they have two kinds now, so you gotta watch, but the smooth ones are the ones you'd want. So now I decided I kind of like that darker feather, so I'm gonna come back, add a little bit darker as I'm carving in another feather on top of this one. I'm kind of liking it darker, so I'm adding that dark to these underneath ones, which would naturally be darker. It's going to have a highlight on the shoulder, so. And I did that all a little bit too wet, so you can see what happens is it just kind of disappears. So I'm going to have to let it dry and come back again, but I got a shape in there. I kind of know what I was going for. And I better move to a different area because that's darker, but yeah, I kind of got an idea now, more what I want, how dark I'm going to go. So I'll zoom it in for you so you can see what I'm doing. And you can see where I painted on top of the damp feather, it diffuses a little bit. It makes it very soft, those lines. It's another tip for flowers. So now I'm thinking, okay, let's start with this bottom feather and draw that center vein into it. I don't know what you want to call that. Like the quill of the feather, maybe? I'm not sure. So I'm just kind of blending it. Kind of a reverse negative painting. So I'm doing like leaving the hard edge on the outside. And I am softening it a little on the inside. I want to leave some deliberate strokes though. And now here I've got a gap in between my feathers where there would be a feather covering that up. So I have to create a feather or a highlight in that area. So I think I'm going to put a feather over it, but it's still wet. So I think I should move to the one next to it. Otherwise, it's just going to blend into one big feather and won't have any definition. And that is exactly what we're trying to create, is definition. So I'm working on the dry parts of the painting. And just kind of thinking about feathers and what do they look like. I want to leave the highlights in there. I want to make sure I have some depth. Put a little dark there to separate those two feathers. I'm looking for my next feather. Where do I want it to be? Maybe this one over here because it's away from that wet feather. And I can see it in my painting. So from all those brush strokes that we already have put down, can you see the feather shapes in there and where the ends of the feathers might be? You might have to make it up, nothing wrong with that, because we're not really using a reference or anything for this. We're kind of just letting the brush strokes define where we're going to go with it. So our previous brush strokes are telling us where we need to layer. And I'm still making blooms in there. So I put that down. I put some wet paint on top of it, and you can see it's moving the darker paint away. And I'm going to put this part of the feather where the sun might be shining up on it. The other ones I put it on the other side because I'm just doing more of the color of the feathers. But now I'm thinking more of the highlights of the feathers. And I hope it'll all look as I think it will in my brain when I'm done. I'll put a little bit of a very light wash of that purple, the bright clear violet, because there's shadow in there and I don't want my shadows to be gray or black, but purple kind of complements the rose madder, so I think that that's a good color. And I want to tie those feathers into the bottom of my painting since I have feathers going off the sides, and kind of make it look like he's grounded there. So I'm putting in just some shadows. I can always make them darker, so I'm starting out lighter. So I can always go back and add another layer on it if I think. I think down here is where most of the shadow would be. So just kind of adding adding in a little bit of purple. I can add purple in his feathers too. I think I'll do that last though. There's this place right here. I gotta kind of create a feather in there. So I'm gonna take that purple and just have a little shadow underneath the feather there. There. So now that carves out a feather. And I gotta soften in that purple shadow there. I'm just using my damp brush, no paint on here, just moving it, just moving that paint around. And that can be the highlight from that feather underneath right there. It doesn't have to be scientific. I mean, we're not going for photographic realism. We're just going for shaggy, loose and shaggy. And our beautiful pink bird. So maybe a feather would come over here because I can see it from the other side, right in there where it was. So now I'm just going to think about feather marks and trying not to cover up where the feather on top of it would be. So I kind of left that area on top. And now I'm just going to come back with that damp brush and move and soften it out. I want to be careful not to make too dark. I don't want to make it too dark, so I'm just softening where I have to, and I'm trying to leave some of that light pink from our wash underneath and poking through. So I'm looking at my feathers, kind of carving in a feather shape up there, leaving some of that light pink in there. There. So if you think of this as flower petals, and you know how you would do a flower petal, the feathers are very similar to that. Similar? Similar. So you can see we're just carving them out one by one. We can always go back now, down back to the bottom now that that's all dried, and kind of finish up those feathers. And there's that little rib in the middle. And this would be darker. It's underneath all these other feathers. So that would be a little darker. So that's good. So I can kind of define that, separate the feather that's on the top from it. Put a little bit of purple in there. Give it it's very faint, this purple. I want it to look like purple pink when it mixes. I want both colors to show through, but I want to give it some depth, so I'm putting a little bit of purple in there. And I'm going to go over here to a dry feather. Now I'm doing this almost in real time. You know, I speed it up a little bit for you because the video could be, 5-6 hours long. We don't want that. But I want you to be able to paint along with me. So if you're painting along with me, just go ahead and stop the video and then catch up and get to a point where you're ready to move on. I'll give you a secret. We're just going to keep defining feathers all the way up here and putting just a little bit of purple in, barely. I don't want it to look so purple, but I want it to look like a shadow in the pink. I'm just using my water to soften everything out. Blend it, put a little bit of that yellow orange, just, you can see how light it is. It's barely there, just barely there. Giving my feathers some shape, some separation, some texture, some definition. So I find that if I start with that center rib, it gives me the direction of where to draw in all these little feathers. Not every single feather needs to be defined either. I happen to be a detailed person trying to paint loosely and trying to let the transparency of my watercolor shine through in all the layers. But my tendency is to be very detailed. I used to do glass. I was a lamp worker for years and years, and I love working with hot glass. So a lamp worker is someone who uses hot glass melted with a torch rather than a furnace. So like it's a glass blower would put the gather of glass, into the furnace, or they pick it out of the furnace and then they put it on a punty or a blowpipe, and then they can blow into it and it'll expand, and you got to keep it hot, and you put it back in the furnace, and so on and so on. It's the same thing with the lamp worker, except I'm not using a furnace, I'm using a torch. So my torch flame is like 2,000 degrees, a hot molten glass, and you wrap it around a little, it's called a mandrel, which is stainless steel stick that has clay on it so that it doesn't stick, hot glass doesn't stick to it permanently. And you do the same techniques as you would a glass blower, but on a very, very miniature scale. And I made beads, and I made hollow beads, so I'd blow them, and make hollow beads, so they'd be big like a golf ball. It'd be pretty cool, though. Very dramatic jewelry I could make with those, big necklaces and, very unique, one-of-a-kind pieces. And it was a lot of fun, and one summer, it got so hot here in Florida. I think it was the first summer that we started to stay down here on a permanent scale. Being from Michigan, the summers get a few days hot. Sometimes they're cold. But in Florida, it's hot every day for months on end. So I just didn't want to go and work in front of a hot torch with molten glass and a kiln that's set at almost 1,000 degrees sitting 3 feet away from me. Air conditioning can't keep up with that kind of heat. Plus you have ventilation sucking the air out so that you don't get heavy metal poisoning. So, the air conditioning is very hard to keep. So in those super hot months, I went inside and decided to practice painting with watercolor. So I hadn't painted with watercolor before. So this is like 10 years ago. Just want to tell you, I'm putting some purple in there for that depth. You can really see I went a little bit darker there. I might have to go and add some more. I want to see how it dries first, though. It might look good, because you need a lot of contrast to make things stand out. A lot more than you think you do. And then thinking that the watercolor is going to dry lighter. So sometimes you just got to let it be and see what it's going to do. Let it paint itself. But anyway, back to blowing glass and how I started painting. That's how I started painting. I just wanted to get out of the heat. So I'd go on my kitchen table and just start painting. And my parents painted with oil and acrylic. My dad was playing around with watercolors. Although I had never tried them. I guess you do in elementary school, because the little paints that they have are watercolor too. Different grade quality of watercolor, but watercolor nonetheless. But I really learned a lot that summer. I painted every day just to get out of the heat and have something to do. And that's what I did. And I cut hair at the time too. So I was, when I wasn't cutting hair, that's what I did. But anyway, I started showing my friends paintings. They wanted paintings, and they had a little show at the library, and then there's a little art gallery in town that my friends, talked me into putting some of my work in there. I didn't think I was good enough, but, I just kept at it, and I was amazed people were buying my paintings. So it was very encouraging. And so here I am, 10 years later. Didn't blow glass. I haven't blown glass in that long. I still have everything. I still want to go back to it. I still, have more I want to accomplish with glass. But I did very detailed beads with lots and lots of layers. Transparent glass. And I made flowers. And I would plunge into the flowers so they had lots of depth. And I'd add more transparent layers of glass on each little petal, and then I put a little cubic zirconia gemstone in the middle of my flowers. And watercolor is the same for me as glass. I love seeing the layers from underneath, all those transparent layers. I could accomplish that with my hot glass, and that's what I see in the watercolor, and that's what attracted me to watercolor. It reminds me of glass. So if you think of Coke bottles, I use this example a lot, or even like sheets of stained glass. If you took that same green glass from a Coke bottle and you layered it on top of each other, layer after layer, that same green just comes more intense, more dark. So that's the same thing when you layer watercolor. You can see I'm using this pale pink on these feathers, but now that I'm putting the same pale pink that I did the background, for the most part, I might have went a little bit darker, but not a lot, very, very little darker. You can see how much contrast I'm getting just by layering the same color on top of the previous color. Now, when I take the transparent yellow orange and I put it on there, you still see pink. You still see the pink underneath coming through. I'm just testing the darkness of my color on my tape. So I'm deciding here, do I want to go for it? Is it too dark? So I always have a little tester, either a piece of watercolor paper, which is the best thing. Sometimes I just use the side of my tape to see how much paint I want in there. Because I'm thinking now I need a few more in getting up to that shoulder area. It's got to have more highlights in it. So that, where the sun would hit it there, that's going to be more sunny, but not necessarily darker. And I want to keep, that contrast, but I want it to be lighter there. So I decided not to go too dark, but I got that yellow, and I'm going to add more yellow to it. And try to keep these lighter if I can, gradually as I go up. So I'm not going to just stop here and go super light. It's just going to be very gradual. I'm going to put a little bit more definite yellow-orange in there so that it does look sunny. So you see that feather, all the details are just a little bit softer, but not a big contrast at this point. I gradually want to get lighter. So I'm going to move over to where it's dry, and now you can see these feathers where they've gone into the neck. It almost left the outline. That's because there's paint underneath there that it layered over the top of. So now I have to go that dark to define those feathers there in that area. And here on the shoulder, here's where the light feathers are. I'm sorry if I'm a little out of frame here on the bottom. But here's where those light feathers are, and they have to be enough separation so that the ones underneath show up. But I want to kind of go lighter. I really want to go lighter on those top feathers. I'm just doing the same thing as I did on that previous feather, which was more towards the front of his chest. So I'm going where it's dry. And I want to keep a lot of the light, especially in the center of the feather. So each feather can be a little different. It can have a little bit more lightness or a little bit more yellow in it, but you want to make sure it all looks like it belongs with the previous feather. So I'm coming back, dry area, trying to see where would a feather be. Can you see it in your painting though? I mean, you can see where a feather could be just from those brush strokes that we initially laid down. The quicker and faster you can paint without thinking too much, the more natural it's actually going to look. The more loose it'll look. Not very contrived but it takes time. It takes time to figure it out. And the more you paint, the easier those decisions become. But, even people that have been painting for 20, 30 years, they're still making those decisions. They're still having to think about it, but their past practice of painting will help them make those decisions and make the right ones. not every painting turns out a masterpiece. So a lot of times, there's things you can do with a painting if you don't like it, but don't worry about it. You can go back and rinse that whole piece of paper off if you want and start over. You can keep painting on top of it. It'll be darker, but you can use it as a practice thing. And, maybe it won't look so transparent and watercolor-like, but it might look more like acrylic. And there's nothing wrong with acrylic paintings. They're beautiful too. So just keep painting on it. If you really hate it, just keep going and seeing what you can do with it. Another thing you can do is use like acrylic pens, acrylic inks, liquid inks. You can use markers. You can use pastels. You can use colored pencils. Anything to paint over the top. In one of my videos, I used enamel paint that you would use on a car because I wanted that metallic look for it. It isn't 100% watercolor painting at that point, but I made a picture that I was happy with. So, that's what counts. We paint for our pleasure, right? We want to paint because we like it. It's relaxing. It's kind of like a therapy. It's art therapy, if you will. It's very satisfying to have a painting turn out in the end, no matter what you do with it, if you frame it or not. It's very satisfying and rewarding that you were able to make something out of just some liquid and tubes of paint and some water. Yeah. Very fun. After you get past the frustration. But that just comes with practice. So I'm just carving out more feathers. I'm out of frame a little bit again. I'm sorry. It's kind of hard to get close up and also realize that you're not totally in the frame, but it's just a little feather. There's a little top to it, and I'm going into that part on his shoulder where those feathers kind of already made a line, so I'm just trying to match that line with my feather. And these are shorter feathers, so I'm just trying to think, where could a feather be? So I'm going above the line there and just try to make it all look natural as possible. I'm adding a little bit more on top of where that line of my pencil mark is, and also making a feather in there that goes over that pencil line. So now that pencil line is almost the center, that little vein rib in the middle of the feather. And I'm making it dark enough so that it separates from the neck. And I'm wiping some of it back. I don't want it to be too dark. I want it to look like it belongs with the rest of the painting, of course. But I really don't want my pencil marks to show either, so I'm kind of using them as part of the feather. And now we're really out of frame up here on the top. Sorry about that. I could have cut this whole portion out, but I'm just putting those little feathers in, and I'll show you here in a minute what I did. Guess I could have edited this whole part out, but hopefully you're painting along with me and you need this time to paint your feathers anyway. So, and now I can tell I'm painting in some of the longer feathers that are kind of fluffed up from him, smoothing them out with his bill. So I'm kind of just drawing those in, longer feathers. So there's shorter feathers at the top of his wings, and then they get longer, especially at the bottom of his wings are really long. Things that you don't think about when you're just thinking, oh, look at the flamingo, it's so pretty. And then you got to think about when you want to recreate it or something like it. How is it? Is it longer feathers, shorter feathers? What colors are in there? We have to be observant and curious. Those are two major words for an artist. Curiosity, just to have your brain go there, like, what information can I get? Let's look at this. Let's see. There's longer feathers, shorter feathers, different colors. And a lot of times the colors that we think something is, there's more to it than that. The lady that taught me at our RV resort we were staying at, I took her class, and she had us all look out the window at the palm tree. And the palm tree is green, right? But there's more to it than just green. There's the shadows, like we put the purple under these feathers. There's not really purple feathers, but there is shadow, there is depth, and how can we create that? What color would we use? A lot of it is experimentation on your little side paper. You can add all those colors before you put it on your painting, just to do a little mini painting. A good practice is to paint in a little sketchbook every day. You get up every day, if you got time, or as you end your day, something quick in your little sketchbook, something that doesn't matter. It's only for you. Only your eyes are going to see it unless you choose to show it to someone else. You can close that book up and tuck it away, and nobody's going to look at it. But it releases you. It makes you have a freedom to experiment. So you can just paint something really quick, even if it's just a feather, one feather. Maybe you just want to do 4 feathers, 5 feathers, just to see how to do the layered feather look. And you can practice that in your tiny little sketchbook, and then you can know what you're going to do when you get to the painting. So I'm going back over here because it's getting kind of wet up there, and I'm going to start putting in some of these little shorter feathers, and they're going to go kind of every which way. So I got to kind of think, how can I do that? How can I make them look like they're all fluffy, and he's got his bill in there, and they're moving around under there. So they're shorter, and they're going to go in different directions. And I'm putting in a little bit of the orange. So not just the yellow orange, but I am using the orange in here. I think this is I don't know how to say it. It's like a tangerine color. And I'm lifting out a little bit, adding some water, blending it around, maybe making some blooms within the feather. So that one I've got pretty dark. I'm not sure that I want to leave it that dark, but maybe if I add a few more dark underneath feathers, it'll kind of go with that. So I'm going to carve in a feather right here. Carve in this edge. So I'm looking at the overall painting, and you can see I've got some darker outlines going on the top, but I kind of need them to bring away from the neck, because I could have left it more white, but a lot of times you paint right over the highlights that you know you don't want to paint over. And a lot of people use masking fluid, which is a really good way to prevent that from happening. I just don't seem to enjoy masking fluid, because when I take the masking fluid off, it doesn't have the edge that I want. And then I got to come back and soften the edge and then redefine the edge. And for me, a lot of times it's just easier to keep painting around things. But then I risk running that same mistake of painting over all my highlights. So I do it too. I do it all the time. So it's something I'm working on, letting in the light, those white areas in our painting, leave a lot of light. And see, I'm painting right over. I needed to have some more feather marks, so it wasn't just an outlined feather, but I'm making it a little darker at the same time. So you have to have the contrast to counteract that. So I have to add a little bit darker feathers around it so that my lighter feathers show up. So it all comes with experience, and I hope I'm never going to stop learning, and I hope I'm always experimenting. Keep the fun in my interest and my curiosity in my painting. So I've been doing it for 10 years now and been pretty focused on watercolor, so I'm really trying to get that look that I am searching for. So I really enjoy it though, so I'm having a great journey along the way. So I got some feathers over here. I gotta paint in and define. Maybe I can leave that top of that feather lighter and kind of come out with this feather here. And there'll be a feather over it, so I don't want to get too crazy with it there. Leave my little light spots. I'm looking at that one little light spot, and hopefully I don't paint over it. Move that there. And just softening all that in. You want to keep it soft. Leave some light. Don't paint it all. Just water. A little bit of that orange. If you're watching me this long, I hope you're painting along with me, and if you're not, and if you have some questions, I love it when people leave me a comment, and I will answer your comment. And if you have a question about what I'm doing, let me know, and it'll help other people too who are reading the comments, so feel free, please do. And if you haven't already, if you'd please consider subscribing to my channel. That helps me build my YouTube channel. And also, the thing I'm working on the most right now is watch hours. So watch hours are how long you will watch my video. So if you're painting along with me, I guess you're going to watch the whole thing. But if you're not, I appreciate whatever time that you were able to watch my video. Thank you so much. Also, if you would push the like button if you like the videos, that helps to build my channel and helps you too to know that people want to see it, and then they will suggest it to people who are interested in watercolor, and they can find me. So this is a painting that I taught in my watercolor class. I teach on Wednesdays in LaBelle at the little art gallery there, Arts of the Inland in Florida. So I've been doing a video of whatever I'm teaching that week. So this is what I taught, and I just taught the first part before we defined all the feathers for my beginners. And then I have people that are more advanced, and they want to go a little beyond that. Or I had one person, just really get really super loose with it, and had just gorgeous brush marks and strokes. And of course, she's been painting a lot longer, and I just love to see what they do. The best part of the class is at the end. Everybody stands in, we take a group picture and they hold up their paintings, and it's just amazing how different each painting is. Everybody's personalities come through, what colors that they prefer. It's just so much fun. Everybody comments on how different everybody's paintings are and how much fun that was to see. So yeah, it'll all turn out. Sometimes, we look at it and we can see what we intended to do or that didn't happen, but nobody else sees that. They don't know what you intended to do, and they just look at it overall as a pretty picture. So if you're getting compliments on your paintings, you're doing something right. It's appealing to people, and they want to see it, they want to look at it, and that's what we all hope for, right? That people will enjoy our painting. Or if you're just doing it for yourself, there's nothing wrong with that. I have a whole box of paintings. Some of them I frame and I sell. So I sell off of my website, dswiftart.com. And I also sell at shows. I'll go to those art fairs and sell my big paintings. And I go to little craft shows and sell prints and greeting cards. And I sell all kinds of merchandise made from my paintings, like dresses and towels and t-shirts and flip-flops even. High-top tennis shoes are so cute. I sell those on my website under shop. So if you want to look at those, go under shop and you can see those. And then all my paintings that I'm painting are all for sale. So if you like them and you'd like to purchase one, just contact me. I have all my contact information on my website also. So easy to find me. Just let me know that you like something and I will work with you if you need it shipped, or you can make it all happen. So I am just, that looked good. I just added a little bit of that orange there because I have some orange in the front that I had put in, and this feather's underneath. So I thought, what will happen if I put a little bit of that orange in there to keep those colors happening throughout my painting. I don't want it in just one spot. I thought it was a little too intense, so I'm just coming back and lifting a little bit out with my paper towel. And it's still wet, it's still going to move, so I'm just going to kind of let it do its thing. Kind of, if I have a fingerprint from pressing on it, I kind of blended that out. So I'm looking at it. Is it going to be too dark? I think it's going to dry lighter and it'll be fine. So let's move on to a dry area. I'm dying to get this feather here. Just go very loose. The top stroke there. Yeah, that looks much better. So you can see those top feathers are going in different directions. And now I'm coming back and blending the one next to it a little darker. And that one's going to be dark there to define that feather that's going to be on the top. Coming back with just some water. Softening it out, blending it in a little bit. Kind of keep my highlights in my feather so it doesn't become all one. With the feathers next to it. I guess that one would just kind of be peeking out. And these little feathers, kind of downy feathers, sticking up really fluffy. I tried to make those little edges on those feathers really fluffy, and these ones are more mature feathers, so we'll give them the feather shape. And I'm just using water to soften and blend. And now I'm looking, where do I want to go next? I like to start with the underneath if I can, so I'm just building from the bottom up. So I'm going to start here, and now I see there's another feather behind still, so we'll have to come back and do that one too. Same way. So I want this feather in front of it to be lighter, so I'm going a little darker. Because those are another section of the bird. These are actually kind of on his back, these feathers. And the one in front of it is the edge of his wing. I want to separate those. A lot of times I will go look for pictures just to see how the feathers lay. Not necessarily, they're not going to be exactly like my feathers on my painting, but I can tell, how do they lay? Are they smooth? Are they jagged? I can make them however I want, though. It's my painting. I can use my imagination and make them polka dotted if I want to. That's a lot of fun. I can use different colors. I don't have to use the colors that are in a flamingo. I can have a turquoise flamingo. I have two friends that are so crazy about turquoise. I bet you they would make a turquoise flamingo. I would too. I love turquoise. Oh, I'm kind of seeing a feather right there. Okay, let's go up here and soften this. So I got the one side a little more defined than the other side. A little bit of orange. And I'll come back up here into this feather, let it go right off the edge of the page. I really like how that defined next to the other feather in front of it too, but I'm going to come back probably and put a little bit more into that one. Kind of soften it. And where else else can I go? That's still wet. What else? Oh, I have all these feathers. There's so many feathers. Gotta keep going though. All in front of his wing. So now it's dry. Now it's dry over here. And I want to do this little area. Sometimes you just want to finish a certain area. It'll give you the direction to go with the rest of the painting. I really want to do that, and I'm thinking that maybe I need to finish this chest, top of the wing area. So here's a definite feather. That's a no-brainer right there. That's a feather for sure. So I'm going to carve that one out. Because that one's going to have to be there because it painted itself, that feather did, and it's right there, right in front of my eyes. So I'm going to paint it. It's kind of like seeing things in the ink splatter. Working on those feathers, same way. But I am defining a few a little more. Just what I want to do. Not that they would be like that in nature, but putting a little bit more dark in there, kind of letting it see what it wants to do. And I will let it move a little bit on its own. Let it paint itself and come back down and carve out a feather underneath it in front of these other feathers, maybe a little darker, because I want to separate some of the feathers. So instead of using the purple at this point, I'm just using more rose madder and seeing if I can't define it that way. You don't want to have too much caffeine in the morning and then go to paint. I paint starting in the morning because this is my job, so this is what I do. But yeah, I paint all day and into the night because it's just my happy place. It's where I like to be. Right in my studio, painting pictures. I'm thinking. Yeah, it's a little dark. Should I lighten that? Kind of made that feather blend right into the feather in front of it, so I'm going to have to do something with that. Don't want to do that feather right there. So there's going to be one coming right out, and on top of those back feathers. So let's get that. That one has to go that way. That'll be the bottom of it right there. Barely touching it. You can see it kind of skips, which is fine. And there's my feather's tip. Get a little contrast from the ones underneath it. And kind of blending in some of those harder lines. Carving out that feather shape that's underneath it, so it's kind of overlapping. I like the idea of it, but it is way too sketchy, like it's drawn on there, so I gotta put some color in there. And then soften it and blend it with just the water. Just the water. Pale, pale pink. Gotta leave some dark edges though, otherwise it all blends into the rest. Making decisions as I go along. Sometimes I change my mind. So painting doesn't always go as the picture in your head goes. So when you first start out, you think, oh, this is kind of what I want it to look like. You never do have a very clear vision. I don't anyway. So I'm always deciding these things as I go. But you have to learn to stop, pivot, go backwards, and change your story. So every painting has a story. What's this flamingo doing? He's preening his feathers after he just got out from a little swim. Maybe he had some shrimp, ate. So, what's he doing? So his feathers are ruffled. So I want him to look a little ruffled because he's trying to smooth them all out and slick them all back down. But maybe my feathers didn't turn out looking ruffled. Maybe they just look like one big smooth bird. Okay, so now what is he doing? So, I might have to come on back in and change my story and make him do something else. Maybe he's going to be, depending on how far you've got in your painting, you might have him kind of standing in the weeds or something and having the grasses come over him and he's just kind of peeking through. Well, you might not have intended to put grasses in at all, but because the feathers didn't turn out the way you wanted to, you can always go darker and put something else in there. So a lot of times we change our story and change the whole painting because of how things are turning out as we progress. And that's a good thing. It's good practice that we can do that and not just throw in the towel. Just think of how else we can make it work. Because in the end, that's what we're aiming for, a painting that works. And so if our challenge to ourselves was to really make realistic looking feathers, the next painting we can work on that. So it's just paper, just paint. It's not the end of the world. If you really hate how it turned out, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll cut it all up into strips and make bookmarks and laminate them and give away bookmarks with a card to somebody, just a little something. And it's just the pretty part of the painting. They don't know there was a part you didn't like. So they don't know that. They just think, oh, look at the pretty bookmark. Just don't confess. That's what we all do. We point out our flaw. Don't let the people appreciate it. Try not to do that. Now it is a different thing than what you intended. So now I'm still thinking about these feathers. They're a little shorter than the ones in the back, but they're getting longer. And now I wanted to keep this area very light, but see, I forgot that. And I'm going darker. I'm thinking, oh, these feathers are in shadow underneath these feathers, and I'm going darker. And I'm kind of giving up all my light. So now what do I do? Well, I could come back and scrub it out with a scrubby brush and lift the paint out. I could lift the paint out just with a damp brush and my paper towel. Or I can decide not to mess up the whole thing and just go with it and see what happens, which is what I'm going to do at this point. Just lightening it in a little bit by lifting out some of that with the paper towel. But see, it's still darker when I come back to it. But I have some darker feathers in there. It all kind of works, doesn't it? It's not what I intended, but I'm looking at it going, I think that can work. I'm not going to mess with it. I don't want to wreck my whole painting. So here's an empty spot that needed to have a feather. Because I didn't want to just make a purple blob, in there. I think there was enough room for some definition in there. So I'm kind of making feather underneath all the feathers. Feather underneath the feathers, and it has to be darker so that the feathers on top of it will stand out. Gotta have that contrast, but I'm putting a little bit of that purple in to make my shadow. But I didn't want it to be solid purple. I wanted to have some feather marks in there. But I'm softening it out and I'm making it look pretty solid purple. Not what I intended. Oh, look, here's a feather right here. What do we want to do there? Maybe I can make that purple look more intentional. That's a big word too, intentional. You want to make it look like you meant to do that, right? So you add it in other places so it looks like it should be that way. So I'm going to let it dry. If I really hate it after it dries, I can come back, get it wet, lift some of that paint out of there. So I'll make that decision after. Sometimes you don't even remember that you needed to make a decision somewhere because it worked. And your eye doesn't see it anymore. So I'm going to come back, and this is an underneath feather as well. So I'm going to go ahead and make it a little more solid where that underneath part is. still leave some light, leaving some feather marks, making some nice feather marks on the other side of it. And I got another feather on top of here that I don't want to lose, so I'm trying to figure out how to do that. And that's more of the sunny area, the area that I wanted lighter. I'm going to have to lift some of this paint out, I think. I'm going to go ahead and finish my feather as one thing and then decide how much I need to work on that. Lift a little bit out. I could have chose not to do every feather like I'm doing. I could have chose just to have a couple loose marks working within the blooms that I already had in there and just let those be my feathers. There's lots of areas where you can stop if you want to, and you don't have to keep going with what I'm doing. I'm just showing you how I got to my end result, and the next time I paint, I might do something different too. I might, remember something that I learned from this painting, and I might do something a little different, a little softer. Sometimes, I looked at it, when I'm done, and I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have defined all those feathers. But that's my nature, that's my style, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with having your own style. And nothing wrong with striving to learn new techniques, and your style will change. So now I just want to make that a little darker above it. I think I need to kind of fill that in there and define those feathers. So it still has some little highlights in there. And I'm looking around and I'm thinking, there's other areas that need to be in the shadow a little bit more. Maybe there, right there, define that edge and work that down, blending it in into the feather that we painted underneath. So like I said, in those shadow areas, you're not going to see all those feather details. So they're going to be more solid areas for your eye to kind of take a little rest from all the feathers. Define this one a little bit more. And I want to blend that into that purple. I think it's looking like feathers. He's looking ruffled. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm just kind of looking around. There's still a couple areas right down here. I don't know if you can see the very, very bottom. I'm painting, just defining some of those shadowed areas and, creating those feathers. So it's really negative painting, but with such a watered down paint, you're not getting that dramatic, effect from it. But I'm still doing the same thing where I'm using the paint to kind of outline where I want a hard edge, and then softening the one side where I want a soft edge, and leaving the hard edge. And then I can come back and add another layer and add more depth or more color to it afterwards. But just to get those lines that are hard edges in here, that's called negative painting. And it's a technique I think I use in every single painting that I paint. I'm always defining edges. So now we're looking at it, and I can see there's some areas that are standing out to me. There's a couple areas that are in shadow. Like that right there. I want that tip of that feather to show a little more, so I'm adding another layer on it. And then over here, I want that shade, that shadow underneath these feathers. And just going to go ahead and add another layer, a little bit more information about my feather here because it's a more prominent feather, and there's really a soft underneath feather there. Just making sure it's all filled in. You want that part solid so you can see the feathers. And I'm going to define this feather here a little bit more. Just a few little strokes. Little texture strokes. And there's my feathers now. Got this edge here where his wing is. So I am just going to redefine these feathers that I had already painted. So I'm just touching up. So I'm going through my whole painting, all my feathers, and making sure that they all make sense with each other. That one isn't standing out like, you know, a sore thumb. That isn't supposed to. So I'm just kind of redefining them. I'm making these short little fuzzy little downy feathers here in the front. You know, little fluffier looking. Then those edges might go over the top of another feather very fine. So just making a lot of little brush strokes with my little fine brush. And do another one over here. Very fluffy feathers. Maybe there's a fluffy feather right in here somewhere. The fluffy feathers are over the top of some smoother feathers that are shorter, so they still are a little bit fluffy. I'm just going through, making sure that my feathers are separated. If they need more color, I'm putting a little bit more color. So I'm just doing some final touches on these feathers. What would be pretty too is to use a little bit of the iridescent medium from Winsor Newton. Comes in a little bottle, maybe 4-ounce bottle. It's liquid, but it's iridescent, so it almost looks like a pearl. You could highlight some of your sunny spots, you know, so that the light from the room would have a little bit of a shimmer on those feathers. That would be pretty. I often do that on flowers. I just put a little bit of that iridescent medium on there. You can mix it with your paint too and make it colors, but it comes white, you know. Not stark white, but just like a pearl. Like a pearl white. So now this whole wing looks pretty different from the chest area of my flamingo. So at this point, I'm thinking, how am I going to finish him off? I mean, I still have to do his eye and his bill. But, you know, how do I want to finish off that wing compared to the chest? Maybe put a few more feathers in there. Put a few more shadows to kind of ground it so that it doesn't look like it's just sitting on top of them. That just shows that there's something behind it. I will put that purple in there. Make sure my feathers are standing out. Don't want it to look too purple, so I went ahead and put a little bit of rose madder over it while it was still wet, so it can kind of bleed in and do its thing. A little bit in there, I guess. A little shadow. Some of these ones up above are a little more pale, so I'm going to add a little more color to them. Just bouncing around that whole wing and his back feathers and putting in little details wherever I feel the need to. Get out of focus here or zoom it back so you can see how it looks. So yeah, so now we're looking at the neck. Looks pretty good in comparison to the little feathers there. You can see they're going every which way, where they're ruffled, where his beak is, you know, in there. Got a little shadow in front of his beak. The chest is pretty pale. I'm probably going to add some more, a little bit more to it. working on a quarter of a full sheet of watercolor paper. And I'm going to go ahead and finish the bill in his face so I can see how much more I would want, as far as his chest feathers. And I'm just softening some of my pencil lines. I don't want them all to show through like screaming. So I'm just putting water down. So wherever I want my paint to flow and blend and just be one smooth look, I always put water down first so that the water will carry the paint. So wherever the water is, the paint will flow there. So it will follow. So I am just going in with a very pale underneath shade of my Payne's Gray, which is almost black. It's super dark. You could use black if you want. You could use purple if you want, or, because there's purple in your painting. So now I'm coming back over it, a little more intense, and trying to leave some little highlights in the front, which I will soften, so get rid of that, spider look. But, I made that underpainting first, and it's wet on wet. So I'm putting wet paint on wet paper. So it's wet first from the water, then it's wet from that first layer of Payne's Gray I put on, and now this is the third layer of a little bit more intense of the Payne's Gray. And I'm just going to let that set and settle there for a little bit, and I'm going to add water to the other half of the beak. And there's a couple little lines in here where his mouth is, where his nostril is. So I'm kind of doing it in sections. There's a little pink area underneath of the bottom of the bill. So this is where all the Payne's Gray will go. So I'm just going to go ahead and wet it all so I can get a smoother look, especially with Payne's Gray or the darker colors, because they can look very kind of choppy. If you don't do the wet on wet effect, you will have to go very solid, very heavy paint in order for it to flow and be soft looking. So go ahead and put one layer in here. Now I didn't put it as light because it's not as light. This is going to be darker anyway. So I'm going in, and I can always add darker paint. But right now I just want it to flow and be smooth. Get my lines nice and clean. And now this is the opening part of his mouth, the beak. I'm going to paint that in all black, or Payne's Gray. Sorry about that. I rarely use black. I use the black sometimes in like a pet portrait, which I do a lot of those. So, I use black in those, and sometimes instead of black I use purple, or I'll use it's called Moon Glow. I like that a lot. Sepia is a grayish cool brown. The Moon Glow is like a gray and purple mixed together, a little purple in it, almost like an eggplant, but really dusty. Great two colors there. So now these are just some marks in his bill and his nostril. And I just put a little bit of that rose madder in there. And this now is just water. You want your Payne's Gray to dry first. You can see though I'm carefully trying to go away from the Payne's Gray. I'm not going all the way up to it. I'm just putting my water in here, and as it's drying I can nudge my paint. Ideally you want it to dry and then do this. You can use a blow dryer, but I'm just going to put some of that rose madder, and you can see I'm not going all the way to the edge. I'm leaving a little bit of white because I'm impatient. blending it all in. And it's just a pale pink in there, and a little bit of the orange in there, the yellow orange. A little bit darker on the bottom here, and it's all wet, so it'll flow together and blend nice and soft. So you can see the different effects with the wet on wet and the wet on dry. So the neck and the feathers, that's all wet on dry. And when we defined all our feathers, wet on dry, so you can see your brush strokes with the wet on dry. Wet on wet, you're not going to see your brush strokes, all the paint's going to flow together. Mix and mingle, if you will. So I'm very careful, because even if it's dry, that paint's gray, you can reactivate it when you get it wet and it'll all blend in. So I'm just trying to leave a little bit of an edge there. And then the front and top of his bill's more yellow. Some of them are white. So I don't care if this kind of blends in, because it'll be a softer transition from the black to the top of his bill. So if it reactivates, that's okay. If it doesn't, it's okay too. I'm just kind of dropping in a little color here. This is all dry in this area. I'm just making it look like it belongs. So I'm looking at the bill and where the color is and where it stops, and I'm trying to softly make that transition in this area here. I'm going all the way up to where the other part is, and then I'm just taking water and blending it all in with just water. So that paint will follow that water, and it'll just stop where it wants to, and it'll be very soft, which is great. I'm not sure what this is. I think it's just kind of like the skin where so he can open his mouth, kind of like a pouch. And I'll put a little bit of some marks in there just because I'm sure it's not all solid white. So there's like a little fold there. And I want to also show that area on top of his bill is puffed out farther than the bill, so I'm putting a little shadow. Kind of shadows. I'm trying to figure out, I guess that's like a shadow, shaded area down there. And then I'm just taking water and just blending it, being soft. Just soft. Blending a little more. Now it's wet. Once it dries, you can't blend it anymore, so you gotta do it while it's wet. And I think so. It's not so white that there's some shadows in there. Get a little shape. So you can see under his chin there where that purple kind of started to separate because it was wetter than the paint on the paper. And I don't really love that, but I don't want to mess with it too much because it'll stand out even more, I'm afraid. So right now I'm just going to let it be and see what happens while I kind of wipe out a little bit of this while it's wet so it can still move and still be soft. I'm just using my damp brush that I dried off in my paper towel. Now I'm putting a little bit of water. I just want that to be very soft. I don't want it to be gray, but I want it to look like there's a lighter area there in front of his eye. I'm coming back in with just a tiny dab of color. Just a little tiny dab. And I'm blotting it because I want the same dampness on the paper. And I'm introducing this wet paint. It'll make a bloom. So I'm trying to make it all the same dampness. I probably have to come back and add a little bit more. I'm just trying to blend it, and now I kind of took all the paint out of that one area, and I'm just kind of scrubbing it with my brush a little to make it soft and blend. Yeah, I'm just working on it there. Okay. And it's going to be dark, because this is really dark. So now this paint has dried, and I'm doing the wet on dry effect again. I want it to be almost black, really dark. Now I did the wet on wet the first time so that it would all blend, and it might have been a good idea to do that this time, but I really wanted to get that dark color in there, so I decided to do the wet on dry. And it's okay if it has some striations in the beak. They would do that. They would have that. Just kind of leaving some areas lighter, some darker, and coming in and defining. But you can see that it's not smooth. Now if it was wet on wet, it'd be smoother. I decided I need even darker, so I just went for it. I can soften the hard edge. I'm just going for the dark. So that's what I mean. If you put it on too light, you can always go darker. But the darker you go, the more opaque it's going to look. And that's what I was saying about how it could look like it was acrylic paint and not watercolor at all. Sometimes, it's okay. It's your painting. You can do it however you want to. That's okay. A lot of my paintings, people will, especially like some of my sea life, I have a lot of transparent layers in there, but if they see something solid, they think, oh, did you use acrylic on this painting? And no, I didn't, but I just used more paint, more pigment. But it kind of makes them think it's not watercolor. So when I say people, because I do shows, so there's hundreds of people coming in my booth on those days, and I'm talking to them about my paintings all day long, so get a lot of good feedback, which I do appreciate. So now that had time to kind of dry, I'm coming back dark on it. Trying to get a solid dark blackish. But see how nice that Payne's gray is, because you can make it gray, or you can make it almost look black, but it's never that super stark black. So now everything that got that dark color, I'm going to come back and add a little more so it all looks cohesive. And that little fold there, I guess it's like a little gather of skin. I don't know, I'm going to go see the flamingos, and that's one thing I'm going to look at and see what that is. My brother lives up that way, so does my nephew and niece, my nephew and his wife. So I'm going to go visit the Orlando Merritt Island area, and they have some nature drives that you can go on. Lake Apopka, which is by Orlando, and Merritt Island is over by Cocoa Beach on the coast. I live 3.5 hours south of them, so Florida's a long state. So I live Southwest Florida. So now I'm just, filling in his eye with that Payne's gray. So it's yellow. Their eyes are pretty yellow, and then I usually will put the yellow in first, and then I'll put the black, leaving some little sparkle highlights in his eye. You can make his eye look really realistic by adding some shadows under the top lid, and the way that you shape your highlights can make it look more rounded. I'm just adding a little bit of that yellow, and I like to make it a little darker on the top and lighter on the bottom. Use a really fine brush. This is my 0. and just kind of do some of these details around his eye, around the white. So that's white all around his eye, or sometimes a little gray in there. So I'm going to use my Payne's Gray. I'm going to define this little shape around his eye. A lot of birds have like little, kind of like dots in this area. So we're not going to go all that detailed, or everything would have to be detailed. I'm just going to do a really soft gray around the eye. Not too black. And really kind of keep it on the lighter side. Give it a good shade. And that yellow is drying, so then when I can come back and put the black in the center. So now this is just to show that the eye protrudes just a little bit. So there's a little bit of lines in there, shadow, making it protrude. I mean, you can get really detailed. We don't really want to do that. We want to do it minimally because the rest of the painting looks that way. So you want your whole painting to make sense together. So there's a little bit of a ridge there that I can just put in and then make it softer, just using a little bit of water with the paint that's already on my brush. And just making a little soft transition, so the one side is the defined side, the other side the soft side of that line. And right in here also, maybe going into this little wobbly thing here. Maybe a little around the top of this. Make his mouth right in there a little bit. And I'm going to blend that into the shadows. And maybe a little bit of a shadow right there. I don't know if it needs it there, but blend that up and then come back with water on my brush. Blot it up. I want it lighter. Just water. Blend, blend, blend. Just a little information there that, just giving it some shape. Give it some shape. But we don't want these things to stand out too much. Now what I did just there, I blotted it and then I went back down on my painting. That's a bad thing to do because I could have printed whatever I blotted up back onto my painting in another spot. So, okay, let's do the iris. I'm just going to come around and leave a highlighted area where the sun can be shining on there. Come around, so you kind of outline that area first and then fill in the rest of the eye. And come around on that yellow part and on that. Using my little brush. If you have a hard time using little brushes like this and, keeping your hands steady, you could use a quill like for calligraphy and fill it with watercolor paint, and you can almost draw like you would be drawing with a pencil. Also, you could use watercolor pens or acrylic pens if you want to stray from just all watercolor. Nothing wrong with that. So you can use acrylic pens. They tend to stand out, because they're not going to be soft and transparent like the watercolor. So keep that in mind. And I'm just drawing some little texture in his teeth area. Just some little lines. Also, that's softening that big white area. So just some little lines in his teeth. Which aren't teeth, they're just ridges in his bill, I guess. But just a little bit. And just thinking, what got too light, what got too dark. Do I need to put more dark in this little flappy thing doodad here? I don't know. I can do the background and then decide. So at this point, you can be done. You don't have to do a background. He's beautiful just the way he is. I'm looking at that chest area. And the wing is very separate from the chest, which I would want it to be separate. I think I probably don't mind if there was some more feathers in there. Just see how yours turns out and if you like it or not and decide. I do like the feather shapes though. And I'm seeing there's a couple spots that just kind of need a few brush marks here and there to make it look good with the rest of the painting. So this is the time to do it. Everything is nice and dry. And these are just little extra marks. Could do this on a few of them, but I don't have to go back and do all of them. Just the ones that, don't flow well with the painting. And I think need to stand out a little bit more because of something else around it. So it's just your intuition, whatever you feel it looks like. If you're using a reference photo, you can know exactly where the shadows need to go, what direction the feathers go, all of that. Some people even somehow can project an image onto their paper and they draw and paint from that while that image is on the paper. I know a lot of people do pet portraits that way. I guess I like to do it the hard way and just kind of do it from my head. But this is just a very typical traditional flamingo with his head in that S shape and bill tucked under his wing, and because that's how they're standing most of the time, with their head under the wing. Oh yeah, I'm just coming through. And now I'm thinking, okay, I'm even making this feathers even more separate from the rest of the body. So I did just sell this painting, so if you are watching, there's other paintings on my website you can look at if you want. There's some more flamingos too. You can see how different they all are. I have one called Funky Flamingo, and he's real wild. I did him on Yupo paper, which is plastic, which is slick, so it doesn't absorb the paint at all. And then I did another one called Think Pink, and it's two flamingos kind of necking. Their necks are intertwined, and there's a love poem in the background and the sun rays. So I was trying to get very unconventional in that one. Real loose, wild feathers and, words and the sun circles, concentric circles. And yeah, that's a different approach to it all. So here comes my tendency. All the little details and, sometimes I end up painting too much on it. Like maybe I should have left it alone. But sometimes I think, okay, it's still pretty. I like it the way I did it. And next time I'll try to leave more highlights in the wings and there's things you always want to go back and redo, but with watercolor, as you know, you can't. You can paint on top of it with acrylic or something, but you can't undo it all unless you wipe it all out. So I'm just making some of these little darker feathers kind of in a backwards C shape, trying to make the top feathers of the wings look lighter because I made them look all the same. So then pivoting, I'm going back and adding a little bit more color to these few, not every single feather, but just to kind of make like it's lighter on the top. And remember, it'll dry lighter too. So we're going to do a fun background. So stay tuned for that. Something I don't think I've done before. Not exactly anyway. I know I've done some of these techniques. Stay tuned for that. That's coming up real soon here. And I'm just continuing just a few of these feathers, just making them darker. These more dramatic. So I've kind of gotten away from my loose feeling and I've gotten into a more tighter painting here. There, I lost that feather. And now I'm forgetting that I wanted to leave those lighter. See, it happens to all of us. And I went ahead and started making that one darker, and I thought, oh, that was supposed to be lighter, so I'm trying not to blend it more than I have to. But you gotta finish what you started. So here I'm going to just define that tip, a little bit of that feather. And since I did it on the one spot, I kind of got to make it make sense. I got to do a few more, even though I know at this point I kind of undid the whole point of what I was doing, but I think it'll be okay. Now these bottom ones would be darker than the ones on top. So now I'm thinking I should probably redo those. So you can kind of see my thought process as I go through my paintings. Keep on going. Keep going, making those ones darker. So yeah, they gotta be darker as they go down towards the bottom of the painting. So keep going. So I'm sitting out here in my studio and looking out. I got all kinds of windows in here and I can see that it's gonna rain. You might hear my wind chimes blowing out there. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but anyway. I'm getting there. We're getting there. I'm going to try to just make these all darker. Still trying to think of how to make those ones on the top lighter. I could wipe them out. I could come back with some of the bleed-proof white and put a little white on there. Or just leave them alone. I think I should just leave them alone because the white is almost, it's not transparent. It's opaque, so it can kind of get a little thick looking, heavy looking. So I try to not do too much of that because it looks like doesn't look like the rest of the painting. So I could take some of that iridescent medium and put that on the top. That might lighten it up a little because it's kind of a white. It's a little bit more opaque, but you can still see through a bit. But then, should I put shimmers on the whole thing? Maybe not. I don't know. So this feather kind of looked out of place now. Kind of lost it. Just doing a little bit more. A little bit more color, a little negative painting here. Shining. Kind of looks like a leaf, not a feather. So it kind of looks like I'm going to go through and do them all, because now, where do I stop? Where do I stop? Still a pretty painting though, right? You gotta look at it for what it is sometimes, and go with what it is and make what it is better, instead of trying to go back and making it what you wanted it to be in the first place. So now it's its own thing. It's its own painting. The vision I had in my head is irrelevant because this is what it is now. So I am going to go with that, and I'm going to make what it is the best painting I can. I'm not defeated. I still think it's beautiful. It's just not exactly what I set out to do, but it's still pretty. It's still a beautiful painting. I still love it, and I did sell it, so somebody else loved it too. So yeah. These feathers in the front, I have to do a little bit on them too. I got rid of all that light, like I said. But it's pretty. I'm still happy with it. Well, I just need to face it. I love details. I love details. I like how the feathers, the outline on the feathers are looking. And I like that I can come back here now and put a little bit darker feathers in this top area where they weren't as defined, because now I have that opportunity to define them. They won't look odd because the rest of the painting I defined those feathers. I'm just using rose madder and water. And I'm using thicker paint here. I'm using like milk consistency paint to do this. Softening that inside edge. Making some fun fluffy feathers, little downy feathers, just short, fast, light brush strokes. Not pressing hardly at all. Listening to the music, doing the same thing, keep defining. And you can see as you go along where it needs to be things to add to it. So a few minutes ago, my husband called while I'm doing this recording, so you hear my phone whistling its little tune. That's my ringtone. I don't know if he'll be able to edit that out. He's the guy that does all that stuff for me, so hopefully. If not, that's all it was. So just him coming back home, wanting to see if I want anything. Isn't that nice? He's a sweetheart. Making him look shaggy. Probably from a distance you wouldn't see all of those little lines in there. But it's interesting to the viewer who's looking at your painting to see all those little details of each feather, and shows that you took some time to care about it and paint those all in. Still trying to decide what to do with the chest. There's a filbert brush. That's kind of the shape of a feather, so I thought maybe we'll give that a try. And I'm going to use that rounded bottom to kind of make some brush strokes to make them look like feathers here and there. And I want to do it very randomly and not all lined up in a row. I want him to look like he has wings on his neck. And I don't have to do it everywhere. I can leave some of those highlighted areas without my little feathers. But look at, they're kind of cute with that filbert brush. So it just kind of use that brush to our advantage here. Put a few little intentional feathers. And it's making my whole flamingo more pink, because his neck was very different than the rest of his body, which it can be a little bit, but I don't want it to look too crazy. But now I'm looking like a little leopard here, so I gotta, maybe that's how you make leopard. I'm just taking some water, and I'm just going over some of them to make them bleed a little and soften out those definite shapes so that they're not so leopard looking. And I can kind of fix the direction of those feathers that I have there. Put a few in the right direction, that'll make them all make sense. And so I'm doing this in the darker area, trying to leave my lighter areas okay. Leave them alone. And I'm just using like the tip of the brush there just to kind of see, just short. And then I'm going to clean up my edge, and there's a shadow in there, so even though I have that sunny spot in there. And the chest, let's do the same thing. Start from the bottom, overlap them. Make them random. They all kind of flow around the direction of the neck, but we don't want them all straight in a row, because that'll show up too much. But I think it looks better with a little bit more color in there. Okay, so here we have all those little short feathers in there. Makes more sense with the wings now that we've defined the wings so much. Now that's softer too. I did lose a lot of my highlights, but there's still highlights in there, and I think he's pretty cute. So I'm gonna say I like him. So you can see up close what I did, and it's kind of soft and smooth around the face. Little shadow on the eye. Some feathers on his chest area. I could blend them even more, but you know, we're not going for realism. We're just going for flamingo, and I think he looks pretty shapely, so I can see he's rounded in the head and the neck area. His feathers look all fluffy. So let's move on. Let's go to the background of it. What I'm going to do is a little trick here, is I am going to cover just with paper towel wherever I don't want my paint to go. So I don't really want it to go onto my flamingo. We're going to get a little wild here, so we're going to do some splatters and stuff, and I am going to cover up my little flamingo as best I can and tear off some places where I can afford to do that, and just lay them down. They don't really stick, but it just absorbs the water before it gets too intense on your painting. And even though there's corners and stuff sticking out, it's going to be wet. I can move it. So I'm going to take the paper towels off and move it after, move the paint around after. So I'm just going to patch it in there, especially his bill, because if you got some splatters on that, it'll look funny. So I'm going to try to do the best I can to kind of cover up his bill, tearing those paper towels and placing them kind of in the shape so I can put as much as I can on the background without ruining my bird. Okay, and just because I'm messy, I better put one there too, even though the paint won't get there, but it will if I don't, right? Okay, so now I'm going to get out my biggest brush I have. This is a big moppy quill, and it holds a ton of water. I got this on Amazon, and I like it because I can really get a whole bunch of paint in it. So now I'm just going to try to put down some splat. So I'm just practicing right in the inside here. So I got my brush wet. I got really wet, a lot of paint in there, and I'm dipping it in the water first, and then I'm going straight up and down onto my painting. So what I'm wanting these to do is make an uneven background. I want to make my background very muted, mottled, and I want to put some blooms in it and just make an atmospheric fairyland kind of background, just very soft and pillowy and cloudy. So it's going to be pink. The background's going to be pink too, but I don't want it to look just like the bird, so I've got to make it soft or dark. That's my choices. So I'm going for soft. So I'm going to start out here. I'm just checking to make sure these blotches aren't wrecking my painting too bad, and I can still lift them out. So I'm adding a little water. I'm letting that paint soak in certain areas. Just slowly spreading it out. I want it to absorb into the paper. The paper's dry. This is wet on dry. And I'm just kind of moving them a little bit, because then I'm going to come back with a wet brush and move it some more, and hopefully it'll kind of soak in a bit in certain places to give it that blotchy look. So now I'm going to come back over here and try to just go up and down, do some more in there. So I put it in my paint, then I put it in the water, and now I'm just breaking them up a bit, soften them, so I don't want to be a perfect circle or, drop. And it's going to look way different, trust me. So we're just going to go and get some paint, stick it in the water, and then let some of that paint soak into the cotton paper. Okay, so got that. I rinse my brush out. And now I'm going to come in with another color. First I'm putting water down. I forgot about that. Yeah, I did put some water down. Oh no, I got my yellow gold. Take that back. Looked like water first, but it's very light. It's that skim milk consistency. And I want to put some of that yellow orange in there. And I'm going to take this paper out now so I can see where I want to move it. See that? Just absorb all that paper that's splattered on, or the paint that's splattered on it. That paper towel absorbed it, didn't even get on my painting. So now I'm just going to take my wet brush, put some water, move it around, trying to make it look kind of blotchy, muted. So I don't want to mush it around so much that there is no light areas and dark areas. I want to leave some white in there, and I'm just using water. Just moving it around. So you can see where some of it, kind of soaked in a little bit. Doesn't move as easily. Using the very pointy tip of this brush to get into these little details. It's a great brush. It's got a nice point on it. Holds a lot of paint and water. So I barely want anything on the background because the bird is light. But I want there to be something that suggests that there's something in the background somewhere. More flamingos or whatever, just something more. So I'm using the pink, the same colors, but so much lighter. Just moving it around. Flatten it up where I don't want it to be. Being really careful not to, especially around that beak area. Don't want it to get onto that area. Try to be careful. Leave some white, lighter areas, darker areas. So it's so light that you can still see the flamingo, but there's color. And leaving this mottled look gives it some texture, some backgrounds. Like you could paint it all soft too if you wanted to, but I kind of like that mottled look. So now I'm just coming back with a little water, and I'm putting some water on it, and that's going to make some blooms. And just fixing some of the edges and just putting some water. So most of this paint has absorbed into the watercolor paper, and I put this wet water on top of it while it's wet, and it'll start moving that paint, but away from the water. And I got a little spot in there where it absorbed too much, but I can't make it work somehow. Add a little more paint perhaps. Don't want to get too dark. You can see the bloom starting to emerge. Just kind of controlling them by brushing them out a little bit if they're a little bit too severe compared to the rest of the painting. I'm just watching it, watching how things are drying. Cleaning up my edges. Just controlling my blooms by just brushing over them. There's no paint in my brush, it's just damp from the water, and the only paint that's in it is what I'm mopping up here a little bit as I touch the paper. So I'm just watching those blooms emerge. And I think I want more blooms. So let's take some water just on my fingers, and it's still all wet. I'm just taking my fingertips and just flicking little water, let it drop onto there, flick it on there to make more blooms. It's going to push away all of that paint, and I like that. That's more mottled looking. So now my background's different from my bird, not only in color but texture. So that's why I can use the same pink that I did in the bird, because it still has a lot of contrast, especially with this texture that I'm doing with the blooms. So we've used blooms throughout this whole painting. We've used it in the initial painting of the feathers and the neck and everything, and then when we went back over it, we made more blooms, and now the background, we're putting some more blooms in a different way. So this painting is all about blooms, isn't it? And how you can use them to achieve different effects, and really cute effects. Very nice. Yeah, I like that. It almost looks like a marble background. I'm just touching in a little water here and there. Can't do much about that one spot. It just wanted to stay, didn't it? I'm going to try. Kind of put a little blob of water and see if it won't make a bloom there. It made a bloom all around it, but didn't move that little dot much. But it's very soft. It kind of blends. It'll be alright. Now what I could come back over and do some splatters, but I kind of like the way the background is. I don't really want to mess it up. So I'm deciding that it's probably okay. And I think once it dries, there's that depth of color in the rest of the painting. Or I can come back here and get my scrubby brush. So this is a scrubby brush. I don't always recommend these, but it tears up your paper. You gotta be real careful. Use my little fine one. I'm barely touching it with my scrubby brush. So the scrubby is super stiff bristles, almost like if you're using steel wool or something. They're short, they're stiff, and it'll actually take a layer of the paper off of your painting. That did soften it out quite a bit. So I'm just using that. That works good. And now I gotta watch that, because that could make another bloom. But that works okay. That made it softer for me. You don't want to paint over it once you use the scrubby. You can, but it changes the texture of the paper, and you'll see where you painted. So you got to make those decisions too if you want that. But here, let's get a little closer, and I think it'll be just fine now. So there we go. There's my painting. There's our flamingo, Pretty in Pink. That's what I named it, Pretty in Pink. And it's coming back, I'll dab it out a little. There you go. Voila, all done. Gotta sign my name, of course. Take tape off and all that, but super glad that you came and watched my video, and thank you for doing that. And if you wouldn't mind, press the subscribe button and the like button, and if you want to know when they coming again, press notifications. So until we meet again, peace and love. Bye-bye.